It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Every month we do one particular episode on the Happy Families podcast that I look forward to as much as any other episode. It's not I'll Do Better Tomorrow as much as I love that. It's not even Book Club as much as I love that. Today is the day that we're diving in with the one that I've been waiting for all year.
You say that like you've been waiting forever. It's only February.
Oh, well, it's only February and we haven't done it yet. First one for the year. This is, I feel like I need a fanfare. JR, can we please have a fanfare? Thank you. The Doctor's Desk.
I've never hidden the fact this isn't my favourite episode ever.
Well, I think that today we're going to do something about that. Today on The Doctor's Desk, for those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome. Doctor's Desk is basically me looking at either recent research or maybe some old favourites that help us to understand how we can help our kids to thrive more. It's the start of the school year. I decided today we were going to dive into the education sector and we're going to talk about what is great for kids when it comes to schooling and what's not so great. So if you're a teacher, if you're a coach, and certainly if you're a parent, I think you're going to get loads out of today's conversation.
So we have 3 studies for you today. We've got some classroom hacks to help motivate students. We're looking at how mindset impacts academic achievement. And we're also going to look at how sending our kids to high-achieving schools might actually be bad for them.
I can't wait. So let's do the first one. This one's about engagement and motivation at school. If you're a parent, you'll note that the same principles that we've unpacked from the study we're about to touch on work equally well in your living room or your children's bedroom or the kitchen. And if you're a sports coach, maybe a swimming coach, netball coach, cricket coach, soccer coach, whatever, you'll find these same principles apply. So we've got a science classroom. Okay, in fact, 41 science classes, 208 high school students, 6-week period. The kids are reporting on how motivated and engaged they are in science class, as well as the classroom strategies that the teacher is adopting. And what the researchers found was that when teachers adopted what we're going to call autonomy-supportive practices, the kids were much more engaged and much more motivated. And when teachers adopted autonomy thwarting practices, unsurprisingly, engagement and motivation dropped.
So we talk about autonomy support a lot on the podcast, but you're talking about specific practices that we can do that will help boost our children's motivation.
Exactly, and engagement.
So what are those? Like, what are the practices that we can do to do that? So
I'm going to share 4 things that do work. And then I'm going to share 3 things that work against high levels of what the researchers called autonomous motivation. You might call it intrinsic motivation. We're just talking about engagement, okay? So what boosts that engagement, that autonomous motivation, that desire to learn and be involved? 4 things. Number 1, providing a really clear rationale for what you're asking. The behavioral request, here's what I want you to do. And this is why. This is why it works. This is why it matters. Number 2, giving students as much choice as you possibly can within the confines and the restrictions of the curriculum. Number 3, considering what students are actually interested in and what they prefer, like their preferences and interests matter. And number 4, giving them opportunities to ask questions. Those are the 4 things that boost autonomous motivation. What makes it drop? Number 1, controlling messaging. Do this, do that, not like that, like this. Suppression of student perspectives. In other words, I'm being really blunt here. I don't really care what you think. We just need to do this. This is what we're doing now. And number 3, the use of uninteresting activities. So essentially, whether you're a school teacher or a parent or a coach or, I don't know, maybe a church leader, who knows? Maybe you're working down at the local surf club with kids. If you can provide a rationale, give them as much choice as is reasonable for the task, consider their preferences and interests as much as possible and give them opportunities to ask questions, they'll be much more engaged and motivated. If you're controlling, if you don't consider their perspectives, and if you do things that they think are just boring, then their motivation and their engagement are going to plummet.
This actually played out in our kitchen yesterday as I was teaching Emily her health lesson. We've been talking a lot at home about healthy eating habits and choices, and this is something that Miss Nine actually struggles a lot with. Well, let's be honest, we're all struggling a bit with it, a little. But part of her lesson was to unpack the healthy eating pyramid and describe how many serves she was supposed to have, what they included. And as we looked at it, she recognized that there was definitely some deficits in her eating. And we then were able to kind of explore and discuss the ways that she might change that. And as a result of that, she decided that she wants to create a healthy eating pyramid of her own, cutting out foods and adding them to it. And then as she makes her meals each day or sits down to the table to eat, she can actually look at the healthy pyramid and be reminded of whether or not her plate has everything on it that it needs.
I see what you're doing. You're trying to take over the doctor's desk and move away from science into practice. I see what you're doing. This is undermining my science by actually putting it to good use. I love it. But what you're describing is autonomy-supportive practice. You've sat down and explained why you're doing it. Oh, by the way, for those who missed the memo, we're homeschooling. We're homeschooling. That's why Kylie's teaching a health class to our 9-year-old. You're giving her a whole lot of choice around what she's doing and how she's doing it, definitely giving credit for her preferences and interests, and no doubt she's asking you a whole lot of questions and engaging with you because she's got you one-on-one. What you're not doing is controlling her, stopping her from having a perspective, or doing an uninteresting activity. So that's study number 1. Our second one, this is a provocative one, Kylie. Everyone's heard of Carol Dweck, growth mindset, fixed mindset. Prior to being known for growth mindset content, Carol Dweck wrote a book called Self Theories. It was one of my favorite books in the early 2000s. And her work has literally changed the education landscape. It's essentially championed, I would say, by anyone who wants to encourage trying. And that's a good thing. And it's built on this substantial and impressive body of research. She's a Stanford psychologist, got a great name across the world, but unfortunately her research over the last decade or so has become increasingly controversial. The reason for that is it's getting harder and harder to replicate what she's found in her studies. Supportive evidence from researchers other than Carol Dweck is really thin on the ground. So this is where I want to bring in Brooke McNamara and Alexander Burgoyne. They have done some research that is really a devastating blow to everything that Carol Dweck and her mindset research have given us. What they did was they did a review of empirical studies and looked at how well those studies adhered to a set of best practices that are essential for drawing causal conclusions in scientific research. And they also conducted 3 meta-analyses. Are you still with me?
Just.
Okay. You know what a meta-analysis is? Meta means looking at something from the outside. So this is a study of all the studies that have been done on mindset research. They did 3 meta-analyses and they looked at all these other studies and basically said, are the people who are doing mindset research following best practice, best scientific practice to give us the right, to give us results that we can actually rely on and replicate in other studies. And here's what they found. They examined 63 studies. There were just under 100,000 participants across those 63 studies. So we're looking at big studies, big numbers. And they found, and I'm reading this directly from the abstract now, quote, major shortcomings in study design, analysis and reporting, and suggestions of researcher and publication bias. Authors with a financial incentive to report positive findings publish significantly larger effects than authors without this incentive. Close quote. Now, I know it sounds like I'm geeking out fully on science and I'm talking about a whole lot of academic speak, but this really matters.
Well, how do you replicate someone's mindset, though?
You don't replicate a mindset, but you replicate the research. So the idea is when we write up a research report, we say, here's the scientific literature we're leaning on. Here's the way that we've done the study. This is our method. We're going to look at the participants. We're going to look at the materials that are used or the questionnaires that we used or the experimental design. We're going to really make sure that the procedure is something that somebody else could do, because anyone can go and do a study and say, here's what I found. But if no one can go and replicate that, you don't know how reliable that finding is. And psychology is really suffering from a crisis of replicability right now. A whole lot of people have done shoddy research over the years, and we don't know as much as we thought we'd known because research can't be reproduced. And if it can't be reproduced, we've got a problem. So essentially, these researchers are looking at whether or not best practice has been followed. It hasn't been. What they found was very, very small effects of mindset interventions. Now, a mindset intervention is where we step in and we say, we want to shift your mindset. We want you to no longer have a fixed mindset about your intelligence. We want you to have a growth mindset about your intelligence. We don't want you to think any longer that you're not very smart or you are very smart. What we want you to think instead is that your mind is malleable, it's pliable, it's moldable. That's the idea. That's what they're trying to do.
It's just a real tangent.
Yeah.
But I'm listening to you. Why would you want to replicate other people's research? It's already been done.
To make sure that it's legitimate. Let me give you a really concrete example. Back in the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s, a whole lot of researchers started to ask big questions about how smoking affected physical health. And it took hundreds of replicated studies before government really started to listen and take action to protect people from the damage of smoking. One study wasn't enough to convince people. It took hundreds of studies before government said, there might be something here. In the same way, if we're going to run interventions in schools and people are going to pay thousands, this is a multi-million, probably tens of millions of dollars tied up in the whole mindset intervention thing. If schools, governments are spending our tax dollars on mindset interventions to help students who are struggling to improve their mindset and study better, we want to make sure that those mindset interventions are working because there's big dollars involved in it and there's children's psychology, children's opportunity to learn. So what this research is really saying, here's the short version, consistent with other researchers who have also done similar meta-analyses. These two researchers conclude that the apparent effects of growth mindset interventions on academic achievement are likely attributable to inadequate study design and reporting flaws and bias.
So what? There isn't really such a thing as growth mindset. Is that what it's saying?
It says that when we do a growth mindset intervention at a school level, it's not moving the needle. So it's not saying that growth mindset isn't real. What it is saying is when we step into a school environment, there are so many other factors that matter here that any significant findings have come from reporting flaws or an inadequate study or some sort of bias on the part of the researchers. It's not actually doing what it's supposed to be doing, and therefore people who are investing in this may be paying a whole lot of money for something that's not going to do anything at all other than make people feel good that they think that they're doing something.
Interesting.
So when I look at this, I kind of think, well, is mindset research right? Big question marks over that. Big question marks. Is it useful? I actually still think that it is. And what I mean by that is when somebody has a fixed mindset and they think they have low ability, they just won't try. They won't put in any effort. Therefore, they'll never make progress. Whereas if we have what's known as a growth mindset, the idea that effort brings results means that the person might actually have a go. Therefore, they're going to make more progress by trying than they will by not trying at all.
So I guess in practical terms for me, I had a very fixed mindset about my capacity to draw and paint.
Right.
And having gone through art school now for a few terms, have opened up the possibility that maybe I could be good at it.
Yeah. Henry Ford basically said this. He said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. And that's the very essence of what mindsets are all about. The research is not pointing to interventions working at a whole of school level. But what I think does happen is when we give people the opportunity to have a go, and if we can tap into their motivation by focusing on what we talked about in study 1, we get results that matter, results that help, results that lead to progress and development and mastery.
Well, I guess we better get on to study number 3 because you've talked so long.
I'm going to blame you for sharing great stories and asking great questions because you did become intrigued. Now, at the start of the podcast, we said we were going to talk about 3 studies. We are out of time. I don't think that it's fair that we try to dive into and layer another study on top of what we've already shared. And the 2 that we've shared really, they coexist quite nicely. So for those of you who would like to know how going to high achieving schools is potentially bad for your kids' health, jump onto the blog at happyfamilies.com.au. While you're there, you'll see the article that I'm referencing and all the information about why sending your kids to high achieving schools could potentially be bad for their mental health. I will just share this one stat. Recent research review shows unrelenting pressures in high-achieving schools is associated with anxiety and depression at a rate an astounding 6 to 7 times higher than average for students that age. Fascinating stuff. So thank you so much for joining us for the Doctor's Desk Special Education Edition as we kick off 2024 with some high-quality science. Tomorrow on the Happy Families podcast, we are delighted and excited to bring you our very first I'll Do Better Tomorrow for the year. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon for Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. For more information about making your family happy, we would love for you to visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.